Right now, the Electoral Commission won't rule out going to the ballot box, even if parts of the country are still in alert level 3 by the new date of October 17. Once the Governor-General formalises the election date, any decision to delay it further on the grounds of safety is made by the Commission's Chief Electoral Officer. The Commission's been planning for an election where the country's at alert level 2 or alert level 2 with a maximum of 5,000 people under tougher level 3 restrictions. Beyond that, Chief Electoral Officer Alicia Wright says we could be in uncharted territory. I spoke to her a little earlier and I asked her if October 17 was the Commission's preferred date.
We identified the different things that the Prime Minister might want to consider when she was making a selection, but we didn't put forward a recommendation.
Okay, so I imagine you will be working towards planning for every possible contingency. So once the writ is issued, basically the paperwork's done, the date is locked in, what power does the Commission have in terms of changing that date, and what would shape any decision to do that?
So once Parliament has been dissolved, the Chief Electoral Officer has the power to adjourn. And generally, that power is around making a judgment about whether people can vote safely. And it's really designed around a whole variety of different scenarios, like earthquakes or tsunamis, and pandemics as well. And so it's about whether or not voters can go safely into a voting place. So what we'll need to be considering is whether people can do that and what alternative voting mechanisms we can put in place instead.
So, could we have a safe election with large parts of the country at level 3 lockdown?
That's exactly the sort of thing that we would need to work through. We've prepared for and are ready to deliver an election nationwide at level 2 with contact tracing, physical distancing, hand sanitizer. We've got, and the reason we're having that larger and longer advanced voting period is so that people can come in and out of the voting place quickly. We are working with the Ministry of Health to see if those services can be adapted, but we need to be doing that, and we're working through that right now.
So the Prime Minister has said that you're planning for level 2, but with some part of the country at level 3. How many people could you cope with at level 3 to still hold an election safely with your current planning?
So with our current planning, that was clusters around the country of up to 5,000 people across the country. So we were planning on clusters where we provided a takeaway service into those clusters and to provide that service in that way.
So, Alicia, just to be clear, when you're talking about clusters, are you talking about communities being locked down? You could cope with 5,000 people being under level 3 restrictions.
That's right, and so and we can provide those sorts of services. What we do need to be working through is we're prepared for level 2 right across the country, and we are working with the Ministry of Health on how we can adapt those services to see if those venues could still work at a level 3. And the sorts of things we're going to need to be looking at is, are the venues appropriate? How would we need to change the services that we applied, whether physical distancing would need to change, and what additional things we would need to have in place. We're still working that through and are working with the Ministry of Health on that.
So when you're planning for an election where people are at level 2 and up to 5,000 people are at level 3, you could manage that safely. That's a town the size of Dargaville or Cromwell. So if we get any bigger than that, you can't do it safely?
And we would need to work that through and identify, and that's exactly why we need to identify how and in what way we could adapt the services if need be.
Have you not already run that scenario?
We're working that. We're looking at how we can do that. What we've identified all along in terms of our planning assumptions has been level 2. And all of the mechanisms in place for level 2. with clusters across the country. So one of the things that we would need to work through and identify is if that's a much bigger area, how we could provide that service, what the options are available, and whether adjournment is an option that we would need to consider.
So you're not ruling out at this point the prospect of holding an election with significant parts of the country in level 3. You're not ruling that out yet.
We need to work that through with the Ministry of Health, and we're working and we're doing that right now, and we're identifying whether we can, and if we can, we'll get the word out about that. Any decision around adjournment would need to be done in consultation with the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister.
So does it have to be a consensus decision? If you decided it was unsafe to go ahead with the election and your best advice was to move it, would you require a consensus decision?
The decision sits with the Chief Electoral Officer.
So you would discuss it with them, but ultimately it's your call?
That's right. It's probably worth mentioning that adjournment can occur in a small area, and it's not a blanket, and can be quite bounded in terms of how it works.
So can you just detail for us how far you could delay an election and how many times you could on the basis of safety?
So the legislation's quite clear. The first adjournment is for 3 days, and then each adjournment from that point is 7 days onward.
So if you can delay then subsequently by 7 days at a time, how many times can you do that?
The legislation doesn't specify.
So we're in uncharted territory, basically, if that should happen.
If that should happen. But if we were in that sort of an adjournment period, we would need to work that through on 7-day increments. And every single time, it requires ensuring that we're working with the Ministry of Health in this case, but also doing that consultation with the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister.
How many more people will qualify to vote as a consequence of the date of the election shifting, do you know?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. No, I don't know, actually, off the top of my head. So every single day, of course, people turn 18, and it would be the number of people who are turning 18 over the next 3 to 4 weeks, because they have until Election Day to turn 18 to be eligible to vote.
So you anticipate there will be a swathe of young people who now qualify?
That's right. All of those people who turned 18 between September 19th and October 17th will get a crack at voting that wouldn't have gotten a crack earlier.
And that is the Chief Electoral Officer, Alicia Wright. Text us if you're one of those people who gets to vote now that the election has been delayed. Text us on 2101. Are you excited or can't be bothered?